Hello, ladies and gentlemen of field goals and Hawk fans alike. My name is Joshua Kasparek, and this is the second part of my retrospective looking at Pete Carroll. This being the coverage of the 2012-2013 seasons. Now, if you haven't listened to part one, you may want to do that to gain some perspective and context for this section, but it isn't necessary to understand all of the content, so you can enjoy each piece individually however you like. Pete Carroll had many things to deal with when he first arrived at the Seahawks facility in 2010. I discussed the dysfunction of the organization when he arrived, and sort of the unorthodox marriage of him and John Schneider as head coach, vice president of football operations, and then John Schneider the general manager, and hiring the general manager after the head coach. But Pete Carroll also had something to deal with other than the organizational dysfunction and the skepticism of fans on how the organization went about bringing Pete Carroll in. You see, what a lot of fans don't remember, or maybe have forgotten a little bit over time, is that while Mike Holmgren, while his teams had been great offensively, they had never been great defensively or typically had great special teams play. Big plays may happen here and there, but there was no real consistency to special teams play, and defense was outright horrible most of the time. This led to mediocrity and disappointing teams. And so fans hunting for a more consistent franchise that could field better defenses and probably a more modern NFL offense, starting in about 2006 with the decline of Alexander's offensive explosion, fans started looking at two things. One, they wanted to switch to a 3-4 defense. This was a popular defense at the time. Teams like Baltimore and the Steelers and Arizona at the time were utilizing them to some success. Seahawks fans thought that's the new fad. We need to chase that. It's been pretty good for these teams. These teams are defensively consistent, and so that's what they were looking for. Offensively, they wanted to stop running the ball mostly altogether. Like run the ball maybe 20% of the time, throw the ball 40 plus times a game. You know, they wanted to be Drew Brees, the 5,000-yard passer. And so now Pete Carroll comes in 2010. And Pete Carroll says we're going to run a 4-3 scheme, and we're going to run the ball, and we're going to stop the run. And I remember thinking to myself, if I could hear everybody smack their forehead in Seahawks Nation, it would be something incredible, because I was pretty sure when he announced that fundamental approach, the run the ball, stop the run, that the stuff was going to come out of the woodwork. For years we had wanted, to be like the tougher teams, the Saints offense and the Patriots defense of old, and Pete Carroll came in and was denying us that. He was giving us 4-3 defense, which we'd seen be below par, and give us a 10-6 season in 2003 with a 23 ranking. In 2004 it was worse, or in 2005 it kind of overachieved, and then in 2006 we were 9-7, in 2007 we were 10-6, and just could never win on the road. So Pete Carroll now had to overcome all of this fan anxiety and anger and feeling of mediocrity and feeling of teams that had underachieved. And now Pete Carroll was going to the opposite way of where the NFL was going with all the 5,000-yard passers. So, entering 2012, now Pete Carroll's faced with another task. And this task is finding a quarterback. And Seattle takes the most interesting route to dealing with that situation, allowing Tavares Jackson to continue to hold on to the job while pursuing Matt Flynn and getting him in free agency, and then drafting Russell Wilson, probably the second most controversial pick of the 2012 draft behind Bruce Irvin, which gave them an incredible C- ranking. This being the same draft in which they brought in Bobby Wagner. And so, fans were understandably anxiety-ridden over the quarterback position, having wanted to replace the quarterback since 2008 and feeling like somebody needed to be drafted to fill the shoes of Matt Hasselbeck, or at least sit behind him for a couple of seasons. Seattle had been denied. In 2008, they took Aaron Curry, they took Aaron Curry before the 2009 season, and then they took Earl Thomas and Russell Okung, and they got Charlie Whitehurst, a career third stringer, in Pete Carroll's first draft. So, I mean, technically it counts. Charlie Whitehurst was traded for a third-round pick, so, he counts as a draft pick in my eyes. So fans were understandably chomping at the bit for a quarterback change, or at least an improvement there, and they had never gotten it. And here this year, their backs were against the wall in Seattle, and they needed to try and improve the position. So, in comes the Matt Flynn deal, and I remember making note of it for how short it was, and the fact that, again, the guaranteed money was around $10 million. This was what they signed Charlie Whitehurst to, a very fair deal where he got $10 million over 2 years. Tavares got the same deal. And basically that's what Matt Flynn got in Seattle. So now you have two quarterbacks on the roster. You have Tavares Jackson and Matt Flynn. And pretty much everybody crowns Matt Flynn. He's the starter. He's the future. He's the guy. And then they go out and they draft Russell Wilson. And a lot of people don't really know what to think. Seattle had already been through a shorter quarterback with some scrambling ability in Seneca Wallace. So there was kind of a little bit of underpinnings of teeth grinding. Maybe not as loud a vocal call for Russell Wilson to be bad, but just sort of confusion and sort of having been through that already, there was some anxiety about it. But going throughout the 2012 offseason, repeatedly Russell Wilson's name gets brought up by Pete Carroll. In every conceivable situation where he's talking to young guys, he talks about Russell Wilson being at the facility, doing all the work, to be the starter of their franchise. And I personally made note of it. I think a lot of fans just wanted someone to be named the starter so that we could start the process of having a new quarterback in Seattle other than Tavares Jackson or Charlie Whitehurst. Both of whom, Charlie had been the most disappointing train wreck. But Tavares Jackson had certainly proven that he wasn't the guy to win you a lot of games. He wouldn't necessarily lose you a lot of games, but if you needed him to make a few plays at the end of the game, he certainly showed he wasn't capable of that. So the off season comes to a close and training camp opens and OTAs, and all of a sudden Pete Carroll announces a 3-man race for quarterback. And this drives everyone crazy. Everyone says it's wrong. Why is he doing this? Some speculated that it was that Tavares Jackson had a lot of respect in the locker room, and that, they wanted to give him the opportunity to fail first before they made the decision between Russell Wilson and Matt Flynn. I'm not necessarily sure how true that is, but even John Clayton was kind of mentioning it, and he does tend to be an insider with some clout, so I'll take him at face value on it. But I remember after that first preseason game, and they saw that throw that Russell Wilson made to Braylon Edwards, there started to be a clamor. And then Russell Wilson ran that scramble for a touchdown, and everybody said Russell Wilson should be our guy week 1. And I even wrote about how that was a little bit of a jump to a conclusion at the time. But a lot of fans just looking for that next level quarterback, and Matt Flynn continued to struggle. And then week 3 of the preseason happens, and Russell Wilson lights up the Kansas City Chiefs, and the job's his. After that, even though he struggles in week 4 of that preseason, the job's his. And Matt Flynn is kind of left, on the bench with a mysterious elbow injury. And this kind of crops up on and on during the season when Russell Wilson has struggles. Well, we can't go to Matt Flynn because he has an elbow injury. I'm not sure how much of that I buy, and here's why. They never went out and got another quarterback, and they traded Tavares Jackson. So that's always been really fishy to me when I look back on it. But the season opens in 2012 with a tough loss against Arizona. And they had a chance to win that game. There's some drop passes, and there's some moments in the game where Russell Wilson is kind of, misses a play here and there. And then J.R. Sweezy, a rookie guard at the time, got abused by Darnell Dockett. So week 2 happens, and they beat Dallas, and they beat them pretty handily, 27-7. And people start to clamor a little bit. Then there's the stress with the Green Bay Packers the next week, and a lot of people are starting to wonder if this is, the way that we want to play it. But it's after St. Louis, the stressful loss on the road where a trick field goal attempt results in a touchdown, their only touchdown of the game, the Rams, that is, and Seattle loses, 19-13. And everybody starts clamoring for Matt Flynn. They're like, oh, gosh, you're wasting such a good defense. You're wasting such a good defense. What are you doing? What are you doing? And then Carolina happens, and it's another eked out win. Russell Wilson leads a comeback at the end of the game after he throws a pick 6, and a lot of people are just like, you're wasting the defense, This should be easier than it is. I think you're limiting yourself with Russell Wilson. That was what a lot of radio callers were saying at the time. But here is where it all starts to change. Because this year, starting out, they were buying into the Pete Carroll defense. The defense had already garnered a lot of attention at the end of 2011 with some really tough games where people started to really buy into Pete Carroll's defensive system. So the defense is there. Now they have an incredible, improbable, and unlikely 14-point comeback against the New England Patriots, in which Russell Wilson throws a near miss to Braylon Edwards for a touchdown on a 4th down play, and then an incredible 55-yard throw to the end zone for a touchdown against the Patriots to Sidney Rice. All I have to say after that game in terms of a retrospective is that fans look at that one throw and they start seeing a great quarterback. They're not all bought in yet, but things are really starting to roll in the other direction because now people aren't necessarily questioning Pete on offense as much. It is followed with 2 consecutive losses against San Francisco on the roads, 13-6, and a loss to the Detroit Lions, 28-24. But this doesn't even seem to phase the roller coaster, which is starting to see Russell Wilson mature a little bit. We had some tough times in San Francisco, but the Detroit Lions game, where he kind of leads that charge and almost leads a comeback, folks are really behind this team and really getting into it. What cements it, though, what guarantees Pete Carroll's immortality in Seattle, is the game at the Chicago Bears. Seattle had struggled. It had lost 3 of its last 5. It came in, it won in overtime in Chicago, in which Russell Wilson led 2 game-winning drives, 4 touchdowns. And everybody said, this is our guy. This is the guy we hang our hat with. This is the guy. We don't go to Matt Flynn from here. We don't move on from anybody. This is what we want. We're here. We've arrived. This is how it is. And I gotta tell you that the string of victories that follow it definitely didn't do anything to deter us as fans, as Seattle wiped out Arizona 58-0, wiped out the Buffalo Bills 50-17, and wiped out the San Francisco 49ers 42-13. Though they had trouble a little bit with St. Louis 20-13, barely eking out a victory in which Russell Wilson took a bit of a beating, fans were so behind this team that by the time they had made the playoffs, it was like the mid-2000s. The energy was palpable. And, of course, we know what happened. The Redskins game kind of started bad. But here's the thing. Pete Carroll won Seattle's first road playoff win, or got Seattle's first road playoff win since 1983. Think about that. The last time this team won on the road in the playoffs was 1983. And they almost won again the next week in Atlanta. And as much as the story goes that Russell Wilson was excited for the next year, I don't think I found a single fan that was bummed that we lost that game in Atlanta in terms of what they thought about the next season. And I gotta tell you, it only gets better from here. 2013, it's Super Bowl or bust. And fans are not just on the bandwagon. Fans are not just on the train already before the preseason starts. They're on the train all throughout the offseason. My Twitter was the busiest it had ever been about the Seahawks at any point. And then you look at the off-season moves they made. They went out and got Tony McDaniel. They signed Michael Bennett. They get Walter Thurman back from injury. They make a move to add Percy Harvin. And they add Kristen Michael. They add a lot of talent to this team. And it was just it's hard to describe. So I'm just going to talk about it from the perspective of someone that witnessed Seattle's first Super Bowl season. Um, just from my own personal standpoint, when the 2005 season happened, it had been a team that had underachieved. They went in 2003 when they first made the playoffs for the first time in 18 years. They were 10-6. They couldn't win on the road. They won. They won. I think it was a couple of games on the road. One against San Francisco and one against Arizona. Against clearly inferior teams. In and then they had a first round exit from the playoffs in which, there's a pick six thrown. It's very famous. Matt Hasselbeck says, we want the ball and we're going to score in overtime. So, there's that. And then there's 2004. And that team underachieves greatly. And there's a great deal of injuries. And Matt Hasselbeck misses a couple of games with like a thigh bruise. And the team barely makes the playoffs at 9-7, and it underachieves again. It's another first round exit. This time to the St. Louis Rams, who had beaten them twice before, it's very rare for the same team to beat you 3 times in a row, and that was disheartening. So coming into the Super Bowl season of 2005 was very different than 2013. Just me personally, I spent that entire season in 2005 expecting the other shoe to drop. When was this team going to mess it up? When was that going to happen? When was the other shoe going to drop and it was going to do something to break my heart? We'd been through it all. And I don't think a lot of fans know that kind of joined right on the Super Bowl year. To them, this was exciting. To me, I'd watched that team underachieve, and then it underachieved following the Super Bowl season, and never became a defensive powerhouse, and it was just frustrating as a fan. Coming into 2013 was different. This was Super Bowl or bust, but I didn't feel like at any point I was ever expecting the other shoe to drop. When there was a tough game, I thought we had a chance to win it. And I would need this approach because starting off the season in Carolina, the team would eke out a victory 12-7 against one of the tougher defenses in the NFL. Well, specifically defensive lines. They would then go on to beat the San Francisco 49ers, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Texans in a thriller. The thing was, everybody sort of pictured them going undefeated. The defense was humming. The offense seemed to be great. Russell Wilson was doing okay, but they did drop one to the Indianapolis Colts. They then barely beat the Titans. They beat the Arizona Cardinals pretty handily, on the road, mind you. They beat St. Louis in St. Louis. On the road, a tough one that I almost lost my heart to. And just going throughout the season, it just felt different. It felt different than anything I'd ever experienced. Because this team played hard. It was good at all 3 phases: special teams, defense, and offense. And by the time they take on New Orleans in December and I go see that game, you just feel like there's nothing that can stop you as a football team. And as a fan, I think everybody was just predicting that this team was going to go to the Super Bowl, and nobody saw a team that could stop us. And by the time you get to St. Louis, and they need the victory to get home field advantage, people just knew somehow that they would get it done. There was some nerves, but the buy-in was total. We were we were all in at the start of the season. We were we were ready to earn everything, as it were. We were ready to buy into every Pete Carroll slogan we poo-pooed when he came here. We were ready to buy into his philosophy of run first. We were ready to buy into his philosophy of 4-3 defense with 3-4 principles. We were ready to buy it all. And going into the playoffs, when they beat the Saints, when they had a hiccup against the 49ers and things looked bleak, I don't think I've ever seen a fan base that never seemed to give up. Sure, there was some panic at times, but that whole season, this whole 2013 season was different than 2005. It was different than any other playoff team I'd ever witnessed or been a part of, where the fans were so completely behind the team all year and traveled well and were ready to buy in. So I think if we look at all of the entire journey of the fan base from the time Paul Allen buys the team to just this last season, it's been quite a journey back from some of the darkest days that almost saw this team leave Seattle. And there isn't a lot to say about, why it is, why we thought things. It's just that we thought them. We went through them. We went on an incredible 4-year journey, and it was a hell of an interesting build up to the top of that roller coaster, because when it finally came down and they smacked the Broncos 43-8 in the Super Bowl, it was like, it wasn't a surprise. It felt good, but it was something that I think most fans that had been there right when Pete Carroll stuck the flag in the ground and said, here I am, and this is my philosophy. This is my approach. This is what I do. And when I bring this to you, I want to make everybody good at accomplishing these goals. And I think that's what we take away from it, that everything we go through in terms of this journey is something that is, I don't know how to describe it. As a fan, it's not just worthwhile, it's fun. It's fun to be a fan of a team that goes from barely being competitive, being referred to as mediocre and kind of underachieving constantly, and having one really good season in between all of what was a mediocre campaign most of the time, to a championship franchise. Not just a team, but a championship franchise. Like the Broncos of old, when Pat Bowlen was in his prime. Like the Baltimore Ravens when they were on top defensively. Now, they never had the offense that Seattle has now, but, franchises like the Ravens, the Patriots, or even the Eagles for a number of years, that's what we were all aiming for. And Pete Carroll, despite everybody thinking that when he initially got here that he didn't understand where the league was, has brought that to us. And how cool is that? And I want to leave you with this thought. Never think that your perspective is bad. Never never tried to reimagine history and how you perceived things. Go back and be honest with it. Because if we didn't have our thoughts and our feelings and things we'd gone through in 2010, would we have been as ready as we were in 2013 to see this team go to a championship? If we believed that, if we imagine ourselves as always having been behind Pete Carroll, would there be sort of the same strong memories that we have? I think a perspective where we're all honest about what we had all been through is worthwhile. And I want to know how you guys feel having gone through the last 4 years if you were here. What's it been like? Tell your own story in the comments. I just know, me personally, it was a slow build, and when the finish came, it was like the least surprising thing in the world. And it was strange, because as I watched them win the Super Bowl 43-8, I let that other Super Bowl go. And I think that's what I will leave you with. Okay?